Elen, Scylla, Lumen, Omen Taelvo. Today I bring to you all the tale of the Children of Húrin. Our tale begins in the year 465 of the First Age, with the birth of Túrin, son of Húrin, of the house of Hador in Dorlomin. And Túrin had a younger sister named Orwin, who was called Lilith, which means laughter. When Túrin was 5 and Orwin was 3, a great sickness came upon the land of Dorlomin, and the children fell ill. But Túrin recovered, and upon asking Morwen his mother about Orwin, he was told that she had died, and Túrin at night wept in secret, for in personality he took after Morwen, who was grim and plain with her words. Túrin had befriended one of the servants of his father, Sador, whom Túrin named Labadal, for Sador had accidentally hewed his own foot after the Dagor Bragalach. And Túrin had great pity for the man, as Túrin was quick to pity those less fortunate. On Túrin's birthday, Húrin would give his son a knife, but Túrin, not desiring such a blade, gave it to Sador. And when Húrin learned of this, he told Túrin that his pity was admirable. Soon after, in 472, Húrin led the men of Dorlomin in the union of Maithros and the Niënor Arnoediad. I will not go too much into detail, for this battle deserves its own battle breakdown. But the important part for this tale is that the Noldor were defeated, and Húrin led a last stand with the men of Dorlomin to buy time for High King Torgon to escape. Húrin was the only man to survive this stand, and he was captured. Húrin was brought before Morgoth, for Húrin was now the only man alive to have been to Gondolin, the hidden elven kingdom. Morgoth would offer Húrin rank and stature in the service of Angband, if he only gives up Gondolin. But Húrin saw through Morgoth's ploy, and instead mocked the Dark Lord, and in turn Morgoth cursed Húrin and his family, that everything he or his family does will bring ruin. Húrin too was cursed to watch every event that his children would go through. Back in Dorlomin, the Easterlings loyal to Morgoth took over the region, enslaving many, killing even more, and forcing the women of Hador's folk to marriage. The Easterlings under Broda would pillage many of the houses as well, but they stayed clear of Húrin's house, for they feared Morwen, for she looked like an elf, and many believed that she was a witch. Life for Túrin and Morwen was difficult at this time, for food was scarce, and the servants dared not stray too far from the house, for fear of capture. Morwen would plan to send Túrin away from Dorlomin to Doriath, for her kinsman Beren had married Luthien, the daughter of King Thingol. Morwen herself would be unable to journey with Túrin, for she was pregnant and was soon to be due. And so Túrin would go away, not before crying out to his mother, asking when he will see her again, to which Morwen made no reply, much to Túrin's sadness. Túrin and his companions would reach the girdle of Melian, but would be lost in the wild until Beleg Cuthalion came upon them, and he guided them through the girdle with permission from Thingol. And so Túrin entered into Doriath, and became the foster son of Thingol and Melian. Thingol and Melian would send a message to Morwen, urging her to join Túrin in Doriath, but she had just given birth to Niënor, and Morwen herself did not want to live in some elven realm. She would send a gift, the dragon helm of Dorlomin, an heirloom of the house of Hador. Túrin kept watch for the messengers, and when they returned he was sad, for Morwen was not with them. While Túrin was still young, he would befriend the maiden Nelas, and she would teach Túrin the elvish tongue Sindarin, as well as the names of the trees and of the birds. But when Túrin's mind turned more to battle and his people, he saw less and less of Nelas. In Doriath, Túrin would become strong, and there would be few who could beat him with a blade. When Túrin was near 18 and close to manhood, he asked Thingol for arms and an army to go reclaim Dor-lómin. Thingol would deny this to Túrin, for he would not set his elves to the battles of the north. Thingol would give Túrin the dragon helm and give him leave to fight in the marshlands with the March Wardens. And there Túrin would become the best of friends with Beleg, who taught Túrin all he knew of the wild and hunting and scouting. So for 3 years Túrin stayed in almost constant battle against the forces of Morgoth. Now the battles and engagements had grown weary for Túrin, so he returned to Menegroth for a time. He entered into the hall and sat in conversation, and it so happened that he sat in Sairos's seat. Sairos was an elf who hated the race of men, believing he was superior, and he held Túrin especially in disgust. So when Sairos entered the hall, he mistook Túrin sitting in his seat as intentional. So Sairos sat across from Túrin and asked about the battles against Morgoth. But always Sairos was taunting and mocking Túrin, who had grown weary of Sairos, turned to his own thoughts northwards towards Dor-lómin and Morwen and Niënor. And so Túrin's mood grew grim, and he frowned, an expression Sairos thought directed at him. So he insulted Túrin, calling him a woodwose, and throwing a comb down, telling him to comb his hair. Sairos would then insult the women of Dor-lómin, asking if the men are so unkempt, do the women run naked? At this, Túrin threw a cup at Sairos, breaking his mouth, and drawing his sword. Mablon would be the only one able to restrain Túrin. Túrin then left, to which Mablon would rebuke Sairos for his actions, though Sairos grew in anger, and told Mablon that if Túrin drew swords outside Menegroth, Sairos would kill him. Sairos, though, would be the one to attack Túrin in the morning, when Túrin was returning to the marshes. Túrin, being more skilled, defeated Sairos. To make Sairos pay for his mockery, he stripped Sairos, forcing him to run with Túrin behind him, his sword pricking Sairos's butt. And so Sairos ran, desperate to escape. Many elves would see this and run after them, with Mablon chief amongst them. Sairos would at last attempt to jump over the river, but he slipped into the water and died. Mablon would ask Túrin to return to Menegroth to await judgment from Thingol. Túrin instead would flee from Doriath, for Sairos was one of Thingol's counselors, and Túrin feared Thingol's judgment. So he became an outlaw. When Túrin did not return to the marshes, Beleg went to Menegroth in search of him. There he learned what had happened, and King Thingol too learned, and was troubled. He heard all that could be told from the witnesses, of whom Mablon told most. Thingol was about to pass judgment, that Túrin would need repent and ask for forgiveness. But before Thingol could declare his doom, Beleg came in with Nelas, and asked Thingol to listen to the maiden's tale, of which only she, watching Túrin from afar, knew Sairos was the true instigator. Thingol would then decide to give Túrin full pardon, and messengers would be sent to find Túrin. Beleg would ask for leave to find Túrin, as well as a sword of worth. Thingol would grant this to Beleg, so he took the sword Englachel. Before Beleg left, Melion would warn Beleg that the sword had malice in it, and would not love the hand that wielded it. And so Beleg departed, but he had no inkling as to where Túrin had gone. Túrin, upon leaving Doriath, wandered near Teighlin, where the Gowerwyth, a band of outlaws, dwelt. They espied him and soon set a ring about him. Túrin then saw he was surrounded by these men who had arrows bent on bows. Túrin would proudly proclaim that many of these men would die before Túrin was slain. He saw at his feet stones, so he stooped to pick them up. At the same time, one of the outlaws fired an arrow at Túrin's head. Túrin would quickly throw his stone, which smote the man in his head, killing him. Túrin then offered his services to Forweg, the captain, who accepted him. And soon Túrin joined the outlaws, and in doing so he became indifferent to the evils the men did, and he too became colder in mood. Winter time was soon passing, so the outlaws needed to move southwards as to not be hunted by the men who lived near. Túrin would wander near camp when he heard cries, so drawing his sword he would rush forward and slew an attacker of a woman. The attacker turned out to be Forweg. Another man, Androg, would then come out of the forest, and Túrin let the woman run away to safety. As Túrin and Androg returned to the camp, they both told their tales. Túrin would then become the leader of the outlaws, taking them away from the houses of the woodmen. Soon Beleg came near Teigland, searching for Túrin. When asking around, he heard the tale of the woman who was saved by Túrin, and so Beleg guessed what had happened. He also warned the woodmen that the orcs were coming in greater numbers, and that they should flee to Brethil before it was too late. It soon became apparent to the outlaws that they were being followed by some unseen scout, and they grew restless. Beleg had proved right, and the orcs had soon passed over Teigland and did battle with the woodmen, who were defeated and captured. The outlaws heard about the orcs and wished to attack, not to free the captives, but to steal supplies. Túrin and a companion then went out and spied upon the orcs and were discovered, and Túrin barely escaped. Back at the camp, Beleg would at last find the outlaws, but they, not knowing him, bound him, and at Androg's request tied him to a tree and starved him, until Beleg would reveal more about his quest. Túrin would eventually return to the camp, and upon seeing Beleg was overcome with emotion. He quickly cut down Beleg and rebuked his men. Beleg would then tell Túrin that Thingol had given him full pardon, and he begged for Túrin to return to Doriath, for which Túrin refused. In the morning before he departed, Beleg told Túrin to look for him in Dimbar, to which Túrin replied to look for him on Amon Ruth. When Beleg returned to Doriath, he told Thingol and Melian what happened, and they were saddened, but Melian would give to Beleg Lembas to aid him on his journeys. Túrin would indeed take his men near to Amon Ruth, and late one night they stumbled upon 3 unknown beings whom they shot at with arrows and captured one. He named himself Mim, one of the last petty dwarves, and he begged for his life by offering his house for ransom, which Túrin would accept. But when Mim said he shall leave and go back in the morning, the outlaws would tie him up, for Mim would give up nothing but his word, that he wouldn't stay true to his word. In the morning, Mim would withhold his promise, for they had put bonds on him. But when he stared into the eyes of Túrin, he failed and led them to Amon Ruth. Once inside the bald hill, Mim learned that Kim, one of his sons, lay slain by the arrows of Androg, and Túrin felt pity for Mim, and asked the petty dwarf what he could do, to which Mim told him to tell the man who killed Kim to break his bow and lay it at Kim's feet. And Mim also cursed Androg, that if he ever takes up a bow and arrow again, he shall die by it. So the outlaws came to live in Amon Ruth. Túrin would befriend Mim, much to the annoyance of the other outlaws, and they talked long and often. Winter came soon, and the outlaws grew hungry, and Androg, while looking for food, came across a secret pathway, which he kept to himself. Not long after, Beleg again came to the outlaws, for against his counsel he returned in friendship to Túrin, bestowing food and giving Túrin back the dragon helm of Dorloman. Soon Túrin had a mind to lead his men against Morgoth and rule a small land, and so the outlaws struck the orc companies, and word of the dragon helm and the great bow spread, and men and elves houseless would rally to Túrin, and their numbers swelled. During a raid, Androg picked up the bow and arrow, and was shot, but he was healed by Beleg, who earned the hatred of Mim, for his curse was nearly undone. Morgoth knew that Túrin dwelt near Amon Ruth, and so he set his orcs to move about and stay hidden from the men. But Mim knew they were there, and so with Eibun he came to them and betrayed Túrin. Now another version states that Mim did not actively betray Túrin until the orcs threatened Eibun's life. No matter the tale, Túrin was betrayed, and battle began on Amon Ruth. It was now that Androg revealed the secret pathway, and so Túrin, Beleg, Androg, and the survivors fled to the hilltop, but there was little defense on the summit, and soon the outlaws were slain, and Túrin and Beleg were bound. And the orcs took Túrin and left Beleg for Mim as part of their agreement. Mim would taunt Beleg while sharpening his knife, unaware that Androg, barely alive, crept up and attacked Mim, scaring the petty dwarf away, before cutting Beleg's bonds and dying. Beleg, once he recovered, set out to find the orcs that took Túrin, and he saw two diverging paths. So Beleg followed the smaller group that was moving in haste, and he came to Tar Nu Fuin. There he came upon an elf, Gwyndor, who he knew in the Niënor, who had escaped from Angband. From Gwyndor, Beleg learned that the orc party were merely advanced messengers. Then Beleg was dismayed, for it seemed now that Túrin would be held in thraldom in Angband. But it so chanced that far off sounds of a larger orc host could be made. So Beleg and Gwyndor ventured to them, and late at night Beleg shot 4 wolf sentries and grabbed the bound Túrin. They were unable to carry him far, so Beleg cut the bonds, but he happened to prick Túrin, who awoke, and believing the orcs had come to torment him, he grappled with Beleg, and grabbing Anglachel, he killed his friend. Lightning flashed in the night sky, and upon the face of Beleg, and Túrin knew his mistake. Túrin would sit still, despite the risk of discovery from the orcs. But the orcs, out of fear of the storm, and believing Túrin long gone, left in the morning. Gwyndor and Túrin would then bury Beleg, and Gwyndor took the lembas of Melian and Anglachel. Gwyndor would lead Túrin away south, and Túrin would drink from the pools of Ivrin, where the madness Túrin was experiencing would fade, and he would cry for Beleg. Gwyndor would lead Túrin to his old home in Nargothrond, where Gwyndor was welcomed home, and Túrin had entered. Anglachel was reforged by the smiths, and Túrin renamed it Gorthain, the Iron of Death. Túrin would win great renown, and he became a great counselor of King Ordudreth, but he came into conflict with Gwyndor, for Túrin counseled always for war, and for the building of a great bridge from the gate over the river Narog, whereas Gwyndor counseled for secrecy. In the end, Túrin's counsel would win out. Finduilas, daughter of Ordudreth, would grow close to Túrin and slowly fall in love with him, which troubled her, for she was betrothed to Gwyndor. Gwyndor would learn of this, and he became sad, and told Finduilas Túrin's right name and identity. When Túrin learned about this from Finduilas, he was angered at Gwyndor, and asked him why he would reveal Túrin's name and call the curse upon him, to which Gwyndor told him the curse is upon himself, not his name. Túrin stayed in Nargothrond for nearly 5 years, when 2 messengers from Círdan, Gelmir and Arminas, came warning Orodreth of the destruction of Nargothrond, and that they should throw down the bridge. Orodreth would turn to Túrin for guidance, who pridefully stated that the bridge would not be thrown down, and that the armies of Nargothrond will ride out and meet the enemy. And so the elves marched out into battle and met the orcs, led by Glaurung the dragon, on Tum Haled. The elves met utter ruin, for none save Túrin could withstand the fires of Glaurung, and Orodreth would be slain, and Gwyndor was mortally wounded. Gwyndor's final words to Túrin were to save Finduilas, for only she stood between him and his fate. So Túrin rushed to the gates of Nargothrond, but he was too late, for Glaurung and the orcs now destroyed the great kingdom. Túrin would attempt to fight Glaurung, but looking into his eyes, he had a spell fall upon him, turning him like stone. So he heard not the cries of Finduilas. Glaurung would insult Túrin and lie to him, telling him Morwen and Niënor were thralls, when in fact they had fled to Doriath a year before. But Túrin, entranced, believed the lies of Glaurung, and when Glaurung released Túrin, he ran northwards to Dor Lomin. When he came to his childhood home in Dor Lomin, he saw it was abandoned and ransacked. So as a beggar he came to the house of Broda, and there by the fire learned from his old friend Sador news of the land, and that he must be careful. At this Túrin grew angry, and he burst into the dining hall of Broda, confronting the Easterlane, and asking the lady Eirin about Morwen and Niënor, to which Eirin, in fear of Broda, would not say until Túrin commanded her. Broda grew angry and would attempt to throw Túrin out, but Túrin, being stronger, threw Broda against the table, snapping his neck. Chaos spurred into the hall, as the servants, whom were Hador's folk, rebelled, and with Túrin slew the Easterlings in the hall, but at a great cost, for many, including Sador, were killed. Eirin would beg Túrin to flee and go to Morwen in Doriath. After Túrin and the survivors left, Eirin would burn the house. Túrin would leave Dor Lomin and search for Finduilas, for he hoped to keep Morwen and Niënor safe from his doom. His search would take him to the forest of Brethil, where he came upon a band of men overcome by orcs, and drawing Gorthane would join the fray, and the orcs fled. Dorlas, the company leader, would thank Túrin, and upon learning Túrin looked for Finduilas, took him to her grave, and there a darkness took Túrin, and the men of Brethil brought him to Brandir, their lord, who healed Túrin. When Túrin awoke, he decided to remain in Brethil, and he took the name Turambar. As the winter passed, refugees from Nargothrond came into Doriath, and it was known to Thingol, Melian, and Morwen that Túrin was in Nargothrond. So Morwen, against counsel, went off to search for news of Túrin, and Thingol would send Mablon and a company of elves to protect her. In that group, Niënor secretly joined, to the dismay of Morwen. But on to Nargothrond they went, and upon Amon Ithir, Mablon placed the 2 women, as he and some others investigated the ruins. Glaurung, though, knew they were there, so he sent out vapors to cloud the view of all, and the company became lost as they fled Amon Ithir, and Niënor became separated from Morwen. So she returned to Amon Ithir and came face to face with Glaurung. Glaurung would insult Túrin, calling him a coward and asking why Niënor would search for one like that, to which Niënor said that Glaurung lies, for the children of Húrin do not fear Glaurung. Glaurung, now knowing this to be Húrin's daughter, cast a spell of dumbness upon her, making her forget everything. And Glaurung left Niënor standing like stone upon the hill. When Mablon returned to the hill, and seeing Niënor, was perplexed, for she would not stir unless Mablon held her by the hand, and that way he would lead her back to Doriath, with some of the company joining them. But at night the company were attacked by orcs, and Niënor in fear fled faster than the orcs or elves could run, and she would become lost in the woods. It chanced that as a thunderstorm rained, the woodmen, led by Turambar, would find Niënor, and they took her to a cabin, and fed and clothed her. But when Turambar asked her name and kin, she gave no answer, and she cried. So Turambar named her Niniel, which means tear maiden. Turambar then led her to Ethel Brandir, where the women would teach Niniel again the words of men and elves. Brandir would come to love Niniel, and Niniel cared about Brandir as like a brother. But her heart was given to Turambar, for she felt that it was he she was searching for before the darkness took her. Little did Turambar or Niniel know that they were siblings, and she was in truth searching for Turambar as his sister, trying to find her lost brother. Turambar would ask for Niniel's hand in marriage, but Brandir counseled her to wait, and Niniel did. But the following year Turambar asked again, and he said if she married him he would go no longer to war. Niniel would say yes, and the two were wedded on midsummer. When Turambar had dwelt 3 years in Brethil, Glaurung, by the will of Morgoth, began to send orcs into Brethil to find and destroy the last free realm of men. Niniel, who was now 2 months pregnant, convinced Turambar not to fight, for their homes were not yet in danger. But when Dorlas came to Turambar wounded, he could not stand by any longer, and took up Gorthane yet again, and hunted the orcs in the woods, slaughtering them. Few orcs survived, but those that did told Glaurung the black sword of Nargothrond was in Brethil. Glaurung would then wait for winter to pass before he came down. Túrin knew, too, that soon Glaurung would come for him, and so he ordered things around Brethil as he saw fit, and the counsels of Brandir were ignored. Soon the approach of Glaurung could be seen from afar, and reports came that Glaurung is coming straight to Brethil. Turambar asked for companions. Dorlas was the first to volunteer, and after Dorlas scolded Brandir, Hunthor, a kinsman of Brandir, volunteered. Turambar would bid Niniel to wait for news, and should the dragon win, she should flee Brethil. He would then depart. Turambar, Hunthor, and Dorlas learned Glaurung lay near Cabd in Ares, where the Teglin was crossable by the gorge. Turambar planned on climbing down the gorge and attacking Glaurung from underneath, and when they crossed over Teglin, Hunthor only crossed with him, for Dorlas was faint of heart and dared not cross at night. Now back at Ethel Brandir, Niniel could not stand the thought of waiting for tidings, and again, against the wishes of Brandir, she and many others went off near to where the fight shall be. Brandir then renounced his title of lord and follows after Niniel. With the coming of night, Glaurung would begin his crossing of Teglin, letting forth a great burst of fire. The stench and heat nearly made Turambar fall, but he was steadied by Hunthor, who was killed by a falling boulder shortly after. Túrin, now alone, drew Gorthane, and when he saw the belly of Glaurung, drove the black sword deep into his stomach. Glaurung, in fury, trampled and threw fire all around. When Glaurung fell, Turambar grabbed Gorthane and boasted, quote, "Hail, worm of Morgoth, well met again! Die now, and the darkness have thee! Thus is Túrin, son of Húrin, avenged!" End quote. Upon pulling out Gorthane, blood from Glaurung spelt onto Turambar's hand, and he saw for one final time the glare of Glaurung before Turambar fell swooned. The people of Brethil heard from afar the destruction by Glaurung's death, and they grew afraid, and Niënor was saddened, for it seemed Turambar was dead. Thus, when Brandir caught up with them, he offered to lead her away, which she mistook, believing he was leading her to Turambar. But when she learned otherwise, she ran to find Turambar. Niënor thus came to where Turambar and Glaurung lay, and she tended to Turambar's hurt hand. She cried out to him. He answered not. Glaurung, however, awoke, and with his dying breath revealed Niënor's true identity, and removed from her the spell he placed, and Niënor was horrified. Brandir too heard this, and he was aghast. Niënor would then run to the river Taglin, not listening to Brandir's cries to wait. Calling out to the river, she jumped and was swiftly drowned. Brandir would then be saddened, and he began to journey back, when he came across Dorlas, and after a heated argument was slain by Brandir, after Dorlas attempted to punch him. Turambar awoke, and he was confused, for he saw his hand tended to, but whoever had done so had then left him. He then began to walk back to where he hoped to find scouts of Brethil. Brandir returned to Nen Girith, and he told of Glaurung's death, Turambar's supposed death, and the death of Niënor, whom he revealed as Niënor, daughter of Húrin, and Turambar as Túrin, son of Húrin. Once Brandir finished, Túrin came amongst them, and he asked for Niënor, and Brandir told of her death, to which Túrin grew angry, even more so when Brandir called her Niënor, his sister, and Túrin in anger slew Brandir unjustly. He would run in the woods like a man who was crazy, and all fled from him. But in his isolation, 12 elves came upon him, and it was Mablon, who was searching for Morwen and Niënor, heard of Glaurung's approach, and he came to aid Brethil. From Túrin, Mablon learned of Glaurung's death, and from Mablon, Túrin realized Brandir was telling the truth, so he ran away to Cabd in Aris, and drawing Gorthane spoke to the sword, asking if it shall slay him quickly, to which Gorthane replies yes. So Túrin stabbed himself, ending his life. Mablon and the elves would learn all that had occurred, and they built a grave for Túrin and Niënor, though hers was empty. And so ended the Children of Húrin. Húrin himself was released by Morgoth, and he came to the graves of his children, and there he saw Morwen one last time, and they briefly held one another before, in the morning, she died. And so ends the tale of the Children of Húrin. Thank you all for watching this dark and sad tale. I hope you all enjoyed. As always, feel free to leave a like and subscribe for more videos, and tell me how I can better improve these videos. Thanks, and as the elves say, Namarie.